1968 can by all means be considered the year heavy metal was born, because it was the year pioneering bands Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath formed. Since then, numerous bands and numerous fans all over the world have made and enjoyed metal. All over the world? I would like to hope so, because metal is awesome. In this series, I'm going to go over every country in the world and explore what metal bands exist there. In alphabetical order, because it's just as good as any order, I suppose. In this first episode, I will be talking about metal from Afghanistan. As a country, it has had a tumultuous history to say the least. The good news is, there are metal bands from Afghanistan. The bad news is, currently, and for a lot of time in the past as well, I guess you can say, Afghanistan is just not a very nice place to live. Since metal does fall under the broader umbrella of pop music, as opposed to folk music or classical music, let's take a little bit of a look at the history of pop music in Afghanistan. Radio wasn't commonplace in Afghanistan before the 1950s. Radio Kabul opened in the 1940s and started to feature orchestras that used both traditional Afghan and Indian instruments as well as European clarinets, guitars, and violins. The 1970s were the golden age of Afghanistan's music industry, when many singers and musicians from non-traditional music background got to showcase their talents in the studio of Radio Kabul. In the 1980s, even synth-pop and new wave come up in the Afghan pop music scene. During the 1990s, the Afghan civil war caused many musicians to flee, and the fundamentalist Taliban government banned instrumental music and much public music making. Basically, music was outlawed, and punishment for being caught playing music or getting caught with cassette tapes ranged from confiscation and a warning to beatings and imprisonment. Many people continue to secretly play their instrument, and exiled musicians continued their musical activities abroad. After the 2001 US intervention in Afghanistan and the removal of the Taliban government, the music scene sort of began to re-emerge a little bit. Rap and hip-hop became popular genres among Afghanistan's youth, and this was also the time rock music slowly but surely gained a bit of a foothold in the country. Kabul Dreams is one of the few Afghan rock bands, and the members claim they were the first one, established in 2008. With influences such as the Sex Pistols, Nirvana, Oasis, and Metallica. They are still active but relocated to the USA in 2014. Pop artist Farhad Darya helped popularize rock music when he experimented with it alongside his usual pop hits. Additionally, singing competition TV series such as Afghan Star and The Voice of Afghanistan became popular. District Unknown, who played psychedelic and progressive metal, is believed to be the very first metal band to form in Afghanistan in 2009. The group initially performed in disguise and remained anonymous because they feared for their safety. Afghanistan remained a very conservative society. They were heavily featured in Rock Kabul, a rockumentary about the country's budding rock and metal scene, directed by Australian Travis Beard and released in 2018. After the events of the film, the band broke up, and two of its members, Suleiman Omar and Yusuf Shah, relocated to the United States and in the United Kingdom respectively. And they formed a new project called Afreet. If you can't find the rockumentary Rock Kabul to watch or stream, I would recommend watching the World Metal Congress webcast on metal in Afghanistan, which was live streamed on their YouTube channel on September 2nd of 2021. When the American troops were withdrawing from the country and the Taliban returned, and a lot of people, including many musicians, were attempting to flee the country. In the episodes, the hosts have a conversation with Suleiman Omar and Yusuf Shah and Travis Beard about the developments in Afghanistan, what it means for the music scene, and about those days in the underground rock and metal scene in Kabul. and how their instruments were often secondhand from richer countries, their equipment was hard to come by and broke down easily. There were power outages, so playing gigs was a challenge. And of course, their music was just considered unacceptable by broader Afghan society. You can find music from District Unknown and Afreet on Bandcamp, SoundCloud, and YouTube, and all will be linked below in the description, so check that once you finish the video. And I've been listening to it, and honestly, I think it has so much potential, and it's seriously good music if you're into like more progressive post-metal kind of stuff. And it's honestly such a crying shame that the situation in Afghanistan doesn't even allow really for any music to come from there, let alone metal. And yet, Afghan metal persists abroad. Rig Veda claims to be the very first black metal band to ever have formed in Afghanistan, and going by what we've learned so far, I 100% believe them. They formed in 2019 and released a few songs on YouTube and SoundCloud. I found this 2021 short Billboard interview with their guitarist when he was in Qatar after having fled the country after the fall of Kabul. He was 20 years old at the time, and he talks about he sadly had to destroy his instruments just before he fled, including his first guitar, which was his favorite. He also talks about how he got into metal by finding Slayer on YouTube when he was about 14 years old. And it was impossible to get good guitars in Afghanistan, and the band had to bring them from India. The good news is Rig Veda made their way to safety and is still making music. Their latest song came out on September 9, 2024. It was honestly a bit of a challenge to find any more news on metal having existed in Afghanistan, and one other band that I found is called Strains of Bellum, and their EP titled Alpha is death metal, and it honestly sounds really good. Now, according to Encyclopedia Metallum, the EP was written, recorded, and released by someone named Aki Shishido while on military deployment in Afghanistan, so to me that kind of seems like it's not really authentic Afghan metal, but I've also not really been able to find any more information on this person, just that he's moved back to the United States. One other band that I found is another black metal band called Almach, and they claim to have formed in Afghanistan in 2020, but nobody knows anything about the band members or where they're from or where they live, so they're not a verified Afghan metal band. And I sort of got to this point where you're sort of desperate for information, but all I found is this old Reddit thread on r/black metal, and the people there were saying that they might be lying, because it's just more gavalt to be from a country where you're not even allowed to play music. So yeah, the music is honestly decent atmospheric black metal, and I totally dig that, but since there isn't really any information on this band, I wouldn't personally put them on a list of Afghan metal bands until we find out more about them. I'm not saying it's impossible. As we've seen, there is legit Afghan black metal, but you know, people do lie, sadly. Stupidly. And that's about it. That's pretty much the only metal bands from Afghanistan that I was able to find any information on. It's honestly kind of sad. And as interesting as this whole history of heavy music in Afghanistan has turned out to be, it's a very short and saddening one for the time being. Still, as we've seen with Afreet and Rig Veda, the spirit of Afghan metal is still alive, and I do very much wish the country could find its footing again, so these people can go home, and maybe someday we'll have a proper scene there where nobody has to hide their love for metal. I suspect future episodes on countries where it's actually safe to play music are gonna be a bit longer than this episode. Please subscribe if you want to keep up with this series. The next country we'll be talking about is Albania. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.